The key stopped halfway into Carol Mercer's back door lock. She pulled it out, checked the teeth, and tried again. It still would not turn. Someone had changed the lock before sunrise. Her coffee was still cooling on the kitchen counter inside when Dean called from the living room. Carol stood on the back step in her slippers for one more second, then walked around to the front door. That lock still recognized her key. Dean called from the living room as if nothing unusual had happened. "Carol, come sit down, Pastor Allen is here." Pastor Allen Whitmore occupied the armchair beside the window, the one Carol usually used when she paid bills. Dean sat across from him with a yellow legal pad on his knee. Page was blank. Carol had spent 31 years keeping books for Cedar Light Fellowship, and blank paper had always made her more uneasy than bad numbers. Bad numbers could be traced. Blank paper could be filled with anything. Pastor Allen gave her the soft, patient look he used with grieving families. He was not a cruel man, and that mattered because cruelty was not required for what happened next. Dean had told him Carol was becoming forgetful. He said she had mixed up dates, questioned account balances she supposedly already knew, and grown suspicious about ordinary household decisions. Pastor Allen had known Dean since their 20s. He had known Carol mostly as Dean's wife and the woman who made the church books reconcile every Monday morning. "I think a little space would be good for both of you," Dean said. Carol kept her eyes on the empty legal pad. "What kind of space?" "Just somewhere else for a while. Somewhere you can be looked after." "I look after myself." Dean sighed as though her answer proved his point. "I spoke with Dr. Fulton. He thinks we should be cautious." "Dr. Fulton has not examined me." Pastor Allen shifted forward, elbows on his knees. "No one is saying you're incapable, Carol." Carol turned to him. "Then why are we having a meeting about whether I can live in my own house?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. That silence gave her the answer more clearly than words would have. Dean had not accused her of incompetence. He had simply built a room in which everyone else was expected to behave as if it were already true. Carol walked into the kitchen and called her daughter. Hannah answered on the second ring, breathless and distracted. "Mom, I'm about to walk into work. Can I call you at lunch?" Carol heard traffic behind her and the click of a car door. She almost said, "I need you here." Instead, habit answered first. "It's fine, honey, go ahead." She ended the call before Hannah could hear that nothing was fine. Carol had once played cards every Thursday with 3 women from church. She had once driven to see her sister-in-law without checking the clock. Over the years, Dean had made those small freedoms expensive without ever forbidding them outright. He would need the car on the exact evening she had plans. He would mention that someone had made a comment about her, then refuse to say exactly what. He would ask why she needed to go when they had everything they needed at home. Eventually, staying home became easier than explaining why she wanted to leave. Isolation had not arrived like a slammed door. It had accumulated like dust in corners no one inspected. Carol opened the drawer beneath the silverware. Under 2 folded dish towels was an envelope she had been feeding for nearly 6 years. A 20 from grocery money here, a 10 from a rebate there, cash Dean never thought to count. $340. She had never told him about it. She had also never admitted to herself that saving it meant some part of her had been planning for a morning like this. She slid the envelope into the inside pocket of her coat. When she returned to the living room, neither man noticed. Dean pointed toward the hallway. "I packed some things for you." A small suitcase sat beside the front door. Carol stared at it longer than she meant to. That was when she understood the conversation had never been a conversation. She picked up the suitcase. Pastor Allen stood halfway, uncertainty finally reaching his face. "Carol, we can slow this down." "No," she said, "you had time to slow it down before you came." She walked out the front door because the front lock still accepted her key. That address had been home for 36 years. She did not turn around. The envelope pressed against her ribs as she crossed the driveway. For the first mile in her old sedan, she felt only shock. Then beneath it, something smaller and stranger appeared. Relief was too generous a word. It was closer to the feeling of finding the first correct entry in a page full of errors. Carol spent that night at an all-night grill near the highway. The waitress kept refilling her coffee and never asked why a 66-year-old woman had a suitcase tucked under the booth. Near dawn, Carol noticed a flyer taped beside the register. Hawthorne Valley Local Schools was auctioning surplus equipment that Saturday morning. The list included desks, mowers, a broken utility trailer, and 4 retired buses. Carol had no plan to buy anything. She went because a crowded school parking lot felt less frightening than sitting alone in a motel room, counting how many nights she could afford. By 7, men in work jackets were opening mower hoods and kicking trailer tires. Carol stood near the back with her hands in her coat pockets. The auctioneer moved quickly until he reached the last bus. It was a 1992 diesel with faded yellow paint, clouded windows, and rust crawling up both rear wheel wells. A ghost of old lettering remained beneath newer district paint. Smoot nut. The auctioneer announced that it had not started in years and would be sold as is. He opened at $200. No one bid. A man near Carol joked that the scrapyard might charge extra to haul it away. A few people laughed. Carol looked at the bus and thought about the suitcase in her car. She thought about Dean changing the lock before telling her she needed space. Then she raised her hand. The auctioneer looked surprised for half a second, then accepted the bid. Another buyer tried $225. Carol went to $250. He answered with $275. Carol looked down at the envelope in her pocket without taking it out. $290, she said. The other bidder shrugged. The auctioneer called once, twice, then dropped his hand. The bus belonged to Carol for $290. It did not feel like winning. It felt like exchanging most of her emergency money for a machine that could not move under its own power. She walked to the folding table, paid cash, and signed the bill of sale with the same neat handwriting she had used on church deposit slips for 3 decades. When she came back, she laid one hand on the bus door. Rust dusted her palm. An older man loading metal shelves into a pickup paused nearby. "Didn't think that thing would ever sell," he said. Carol smiled without much humor. "Neither did I." He squinted at the faded lettering. "Funny seeing Route 9 again. Church used that bus before the district bought it back." Carol turned toward him. "Which church?" The man's expression changed as though he had said more than he intended. "Long time ago." He lifted a hand and walked away before she could ask another question. Carol climbed the bus steps and sat behind the wheel. The cracked vinyl seat gave a tired sigh under her weight. She looked down the aisle at rows of dull brown benches and realized she had just bought the first place. Dean could not tell her to leave. The bus still needed somewhere to go. 2 months earlier, Carol's Aunt May Porter had died and left Carol a small parcel outside Havana, Ohio. The transfer had been recorded years before through a transfer on death deed. Carol had received the county notice after May's death and put it in a folder without mentioning it to Dean. The secrecy had bothered her at the time. Now it felt like the only reason she had somewhere to take the bus. The property was 4 acres of tall grass, a gravel track, and the remains of a collapsing equipment shed. Carol had visited May only a handful of times in 20 years. Dean had always called her difficult and found a reason not to come along. A tow operator from the auction lot agreed to drag the bus to the property for $40. Carol paid him from the cash she kept in her purse for gas and groceries. When the tow truck left, the bus sat crooked beside the ruined shed under a wide October sky. Carol stood alone in the weeds and listened to the silence. She had a nearly empty envelope, an old sedan, a suitcase, and a piece of land she had never expected to need. It was not much. It was her. She bought a broom, bottled water, and a cheap flashlight at a hardware store on the way back from town. By dusk, she had swept mouse droppings and dried leaves from the aisle. She wiped down 2 benches and made a bed from a stadium blanket in her trunk. The night cooled quickly. Wind pressed against the bus panels, making small metallic pops as the frame settled. Carol lay awake listening to crickets outside and the old bus answer them with its own tired sounds. Sometime after midnight, she got up to move the blanket away from a draft. Her heel sank slightly beside the rear bench. She pressed again. The floor flexed where it should not have. Carol knelt with the flashlight between her teeth and ran her fingers along the edge of a plywood patch. One side lifted. Cold metal breathed up from underneath. That was how she found the box. For a while she only stared at it. The steel case was about the length of a loaf of bread, its corners eaten with rust, its padlock fused nearly solid. Carol tugged once and stopped. Her fingers were numb and she had no proper tools. She sat back on her heels in the narrow aisle. When she was 11, her mother had taught her to help count church offerings in a tiny room behind the sanctuary. Her mother's rule had been simple. When a number did not fit, you did not force the page to balance. You went back until you found what was wrong. Carol had followed that rule for money her entire life. She had not understood until that moment how long she had ignored it everywhere else. She rested her palm on the cold lid. "Tomorrow," she whispered. It was the first promise she had made in days that belonged only to her. At daylight, Carol searched what remained of May's shed. Under a shelf that had fallen sideways, she found a pair of heavy fencing pliers and a short pry bar. The padlock resisted until the hasp finally tore free with a sharp metallic snap. Inside the box lay an oilcloth-wrapped notebook, a small brass key, and a folded scrap of paper. 3 characters were written at the top of the scrap. R9A. Below them was one sentence in careful block print. If you have to leave, there is room. Carol read it twice. Then she untied the notebook. The first pages were ruled into narrow columns by hand. Initials appeared in the first column, dates from the 1970s in the second, destinations in the third, and short notes in the fourth. No full name, no explanation. One line read, MT April 3, 1974 northbound connection met at 610 Mother plus 2 complete. Another ended, seat 5 clear. A third said only crossed county line safely. Carol recognized the shape of the record, even though she did not yet understand the business it recorded. It was a ledger. Whoever kept it closed every entry. Nothing was left hanging. Carol turned several pages, then stopped. She needed a bathroom, food, and someone who could tell her what Dean had actually set in motion. The bus mystery could wait a few hours. Her own clock might not. At the Haven Rock Public Library, Carol used the restroom, charged her phone, and warmed up near a radiator. A bulletin board beside the copier held a flyer for the Hawthorne County Council on Aging. The words financial abuse, housing crisis, and legal referrals were printed near the bottom. Carol copied the address. Tessa Grant's office was 3 blocks away in a converted county building with worn carpet and a space heater under the desk. Tessa looked to be in her late 40s with silver beginning at her temples and reading glasses hanging from a cord. She listened without interrupting while Carol described the changed lock, the meeting, Dr. Fulton's supposed concern, and the power of attorney Dean had insisted they sign several years earlier for emergencies. When Carol finished, Tessa asked one question. Has any doctor actually evaluated you? No. Has a judge declared you unable to manage your own affairs? No. Then Dean does not get to turn his opinion into a legal fact by repeating it. Carol looked down at her hands. It does not feel that simple. It rarely feels simple when the person applying pressure has spent years teaching you that resistance is proof you need more pressure. Tessa pulled her keyboard closer. With your permission, I want to check the county court docket and a few public records. Carol nodded. The clicking of the keys seemed loud in the small office. Tessa's expression changed, first in her mouth, then in her eyes. There is a guardianship matter being prepared in probate court under Dean's name. Carol leaned forward. What does that mean? It means this is bigger than asking you to stay somewhere else. Tessa turned the monitor just enough for Carol to see a case entry and a hearing date several weeks away. The filing is not the same thing as an order, Tessa said. He still has to prove his case. But if he does, then someone else could be given authority over decisions you currently make for yourself. Carol felt the heater click off beneath the desk. The room became suddenly too quiet. Tessa continued carefully. If your power of attorney is still in effect, we also need to review what authority it gives him and whether you want it revoked. I do. The answer came so fast that Carol surprised herself. Tessa nodded once. Good, then we document capacity, get legal help, and make sure the court hears from you instead of only about you. Carol pressed her lips together. Dean said I was confused about money. Are you? Carol looked up. For 31 years I reconciled 3 Sunday collections, a building fund, payroll withholding, and a benevolence account with receipts that arrived whenever people remembered they existed. Tessa's mouth twitched. That sounds like a no. It isn't. Tessa sat back. Then start there. You do not have to sound helpless for someone to help you. Carol had not realized until that moment how badly she needed to hear that sentence. She took the notebook from her tote bag and set it on the desk. I found something else last night. It has nothing to do with Dean, I think. Tessa opened the first page and studied the columns. My grandmother kept church records with handwriting like this, she said. Not these codes, but this kind of discipline. She closed the cover gently. The Historical Society might recognize the root or the organizations behind it. Carol left with 3 things in her bag: an intake packet, the old notebook, and the name of a legal aid attorney Tessa intended to call that afternoon. She also left with a deadline that had not existed in her mind that morning. Several weeks. Long enough to fight if she moved now. Short enough that she could not keep pretending Dean merely wanted a cooling-off period. That night, back on the bus, Carol read the ledger from the beginning. A battery lantern from Tessa cast a pale circle over the pages. The handwriting never wandered. Initial, date, destination, outcome, sometimes a seat number, sometimes child or 2 children, sometimes a note that a car had met the passenger on the other side of the county. Carol read every line twice. By the 40th entry, a pattern had begun to emerge. The destinations were not vacation towns or church camps. They were places with bus depots, relatives, women's shelters, and larger cities where a person could disappear into a new start. Carol did not need the words domestic violence written on the page to understand what the ledger was tracking. These were exits. Someone had used Route 9 to move women and children away from homes they could not safely leave in public. The realization made Carol sit back against the window. She looked down the dark aisle. The cracked benches no longer looked empty. They looked occupied by the shape of people whose names had been deliberately withheld. Behind the driver's seat, something caught her eye. A pressed wood panel sat half an inch proud of the metal frame. Carol stared at it. The misalignment was tiny. She would have noticed it instantly in a filing cabinet or a ledger drawer. She had spent much of her life being told that noticing too much made her difficult. That night it made her useful. She worked her fingernails into the edge and eased the panel loose. A bundle of envelopes rested in the narrow cavity behind it. They were tied with cotton string, yellowed but dry. None had an address on the outside. Inside were letters written in different hands over many years. One woman thanked the unknown driver who had gotten her and her daughter to relatives in another city. Another wrote that her sons were grown and still celebrated the date they got on the yellow bus. A third said she had never learned the names of everyone who helped her and understood now that this had been the point. Carol read until the lantern dimmed. No one in the letters treated secrecy as shame. They treated it as protection. Near the back of the notebook, she found a brittle newspaper clipping folded between two pages. The top half had been torn away. Only the bottom portion of a headline remained. Steps down from Bible class after questions from members. The date was March 1979. No name survived on the clipping. Carol turned it over, blank. For several minutes, she listened to the wind-pressed dry grass against the bus tires. The words questions from members bothered her. They sounded clean, respectable. They sounded like language chosen so no one had to say exactly what accusation had been made. Carol thought of Pastor Allen telling her no one was calling her incapable. She thought of Dean arranging a meeting in which everyone acted as if the conclusion already existed. The mechanism felt familiar even if the people were not. The next morning, Carol returned to the library. A librarian named Eli Navarro helped her load archived editions of the Hawthorne Gazette onto a microfilm reader. Carol had only a month, a year, and half a headline. That was enough. They found the item near the bottom of a church news page, dated in March 1979. It was 5 sentences long. Mrs. Beatrice Mercer has resigned from her adult Bible teaching role at Cedar Light Fellowship after unverified concerns were raised by several members. Carol stopped breathing for a second. Mercer, Dean's last name, the surname she had carried for 12 years. She read the item again. Beatrice Mercer. The church was the same congregation where Carol had kept books for most of her adult life, though it had used a different building then. Eli printed the page. Family, he asked quietly. My husband's mother. Carol heard the words come out before she had fully accepted them. Dean almost never spoke about Beatrice. Once years earlier, Carol had asked if there were family Christmas ornaments in storage. Dean had said his mother had been hard to know and changed the subject. At the time, Carol had accepted that as a memory. Now she wondered if it was an inherited verdict. Her phone rang in the parking lot. Tessa had found Nina Patel, an attorney with a senior legal project in the county. Nina could see Carol in 2 days. Tessa also wanted Carol to schedule an independent cognitive evaluation with a clinician who had no relationship to Dean or Dr. Fulton. We are not trying to turn your life into a stack of paperwork, Tessa said. We are making sure the paper reflects the person. Carol looked through the windshield at the printed article on the passenger seat. I think I found the woman who kept the ledger. She told Tessa the name. Tessa was silent for a beat. Dean's mother. Yes, that may not change the court case. I know, but it may change what you understand about the family you married into. Carol looked at the old bus key lying beside the article. It already has. Back at the bus, she read the final pages of Beatrice's ledger. The last complete entry closed a trip from 1978. After that came one page without columns. Beatrice had written in a looser hand. She did not explain the network or defend herself. She wrote only that the bus had been useful because people ask fewer questions when they thought they knew where a church bus was going. She hoped that if anyone ever found the records, they would understand why the names were missing. Then came one final sentence. Use what still works to help the next person get clear. Carol laid her hand over the words. She had been expecting a confession, a secret code, maybe some explanation of the brass key. Instead, she found a principle. Beatrice had built a system around not demanding more of frightened people than they were ready to give. Carol thought about how Dean had done the opposite. He had taken every hesitation from her and turned it into evidence against her. The difference was not loud. It was the difference between offering someone a road and choosing the road for them. Carol cried for the first time since leaving the house, not because she had solved the ledger, because she could see the outline of a woman whose name had been reduced to a rumor, and because the outline looked uncomfortably familiar. Tessa called 2 days later with a name. Rose Danner was 82 and lived in eastern Indiana a few hours west. Tessa had found her through an old community services directory and a later survivor support record that matched one set of initials in the ledger. Carol asked if contacting her would be intrusive. "Call first," Tessa said. "Let her decide whether she wants the door opened." Rose answered on the 4th ring. Carol explained only that she had found an old Route 9 ledger connected to Beatrice Mercer. There was a long silence. Then Rose said, "You found Bay's book?" Carol gripped the phone tighter. "Yes, bring it." A narrow gravel lane led Carol to Rose's small house beneath a row of maple trees. Wind chimes crowded the porch and moved even when the air seemed still. Rose opened the door slowly, using a cane in one hand. She had been polite on the phone. In person, she looked guarded until Carol took the notebook from her bag. Rose recognized the handwriting before the cover was fully open. Her free hand rose to her mouth. "That is B." She said the name like someone entering a room she had not visited in decades. They sat at a kitchen table with untouched tea between them. Rose turned pages until her finger stopped on an October 1976 entry. "D2 Boys Western connection complete." "That was us," she said. Carol did not ask why until Rose looked up and nodded once. "My husband could be charming for 6 days and dangerous on the 7th, Rose said. The 7th day kept getting closer together. She had told Beatrice almost by accident in a church parking lot. Beatrice had not asked for every bruise, every argument, or every reason Rose had stayed. She had asked where Rose could go and whether her boys had coats. 3 days later, the church announced a weekday picnic caravan. A bus and 2 cars left town with covered dishes, folding chairs, children, and enough ordinary activity that no husband watching from a distance would have found it suspicious. The picnic never happened. Rose and her sons got off beyond the county line and into a waiting car. A woman Rose never knew by name drove them to a cousin who had agreed to hide them for a week. Beatrice made leaving look boring, Rose said. That was her gift. Carol looked at the ledger. She kept everything so exact, because exact was safe. If she wrote too much, the book became dangerous. Rose traced the old entry with one finger. "She never asked me to tell my story better. She just helped me get out of it." Carol let that sit between them. Then she asked the question she had driven 3 hours to ask. What happened to Beatrice in 1979? Rose's expression hardened. Her husband happened. Dean's father? Walter Mercer. Rose pushed her tea away untouched. He knew she was going places without telling him everything. Meetings, evening drives, time at the Grange Hall. He thought a wife keeping anything from him was the same as a wife betraying him. Did he know about the women? No, Bea protected us from him too. Rose gave a short, humorless laugh. Walter did not need the truth. He needed a story that punished her for not asking permission. According to Rose, Walter began asking men at church where Beatrice went at night and who she met. He suggested she was hiding a relationship. He never made a formal accusation. He did not have to. By the time church leaders approached Beatrice, the rumor already had the authority of something repeated in respectable voices. She could not defend herself without exposing women who were still hiding, Rose said. So she resigned. She chose our safety over her own name. Carol's throat tightened. And Dean, he was a teenager. Rose looked toward the window. He watched his mother lose the class she loved. Walter told him she had embarrassed the family. I doubt anyone ever sat that boy down and told him the truth. Carol thought of Dean saying Beatrice had been hard to know. Not a lie exactly. Something worse in its own way. A conclusion inherited before he was old enough to question who had written it. Rose studied Carol across the table. Why are you asking now? Carol told her. Not every detail, but enough. The changed lock. The guardianship filing. The claim that she was confused. Dean's quiet certainty that he should make decisions for her. Rose closed her eyes for a moment. When men cannot admit they want control, she said, they often rename it concern. Carol did not answer. She had heard that sentence in other forms all week. Hearing it from a woman who had known Beatrice made it land differently. Before Carol left, Rose copied the ledger entry connected to her family. She did not ask to keep the original. At the door, she touched the notebook once. Bea would hate that this survived if it endangered anyone. The women in it are mostly gone or elderly now. That is not what I mean. Rose looked directly at Carol. She would hate it if you turned her courage into another reason to tell someone else what they have to do. Carol understood. The bus had never been about rescuing people who could not think for themselves. It had been about preserving enough space for them to choose. On the drive back to Ohio, Carol kept the radio off. She pictured Dean at 15, absorbing his father's version of Beatrice because no competing version had been safe to tell him. Understanding that did not excuse what he was doing to Carol. It did make the shape of it clearer. Control could be learned like table manners. So could silence. The question was whether either had to be inherited forever. Dean's sedan was waiting at the top of May's gravel drive when Carol returned. He remained inside with the engine running for almost a minute. Carol watched from the bus doorway. Finally, he stepped out carrying a folded piece of paper. I only want to talk. Carol stayed on the top step. Then talk from there. Dean stopped several yards away. His eyes moved from the bus to the sagging shed to the weeds around her. You cannot live like this. I am living. People are saying, you have been digging through old church records. I have. About my mother. Yes, his jaw tightened. That is private family history. Carol almost laughed. You filed a court petition saying I may not be competent to manage my own life. That is different. It is different because you chose who gets examined. Dean looked away. Carol stepped down one stair. Your mother helped women leave dangerous homes. Your father spread a rumor because she would not tell him where she went. Dean's face went still. Carol continued. The church pushed her out and she let them because defending herself would have exposed the women she was protecting. Who told you that? A woman who rode this bus with her 2 sons. Something changed behind Dean's eyes. It was not disbelief. It was recognition trying to hide before it had fully appeared. You need to leave this alone, he said. Why? Because it cannot help anyone now. It helped me understand why your concern always seems to require my obedience. Dean's voice sharpened for the first time. That is not fair. No. Fair would have been telling me what this was really about before you changed my locks. He unfolded the paper in his hand. It was a check. I can put you somewhere decent, he said. $10,000. Enough for a deposit and several months somewhere comfortable. Carol looked at the check without reaching for it. What do I have to sign? Dean hesitated. There is a residence outside town, Brookfield House. They would need some authorization forms. And you would withdraw the guardianship case? We could avoid all of this. All of what? Court. People talking. Carol stepped off the bus completely. So the 10,000 is not help, it is the price of my silence. Dean lowered his hand. You always do that. Do what? Turn everything into a transaction. I was a bookkeeper, Dean. Transactions are easier when people stop pretending they are gifts. The old instinct returned with sudden clarity. Carol had been looking at the wrong account. Where is the retirement money? Dean blinked. What? The Fidelity rollover. We had $186,000 in it when we married. He said nothing. Carol had asked Nina to help her gather statements tied to the power of attorney and the joint tax filings. She did not yet have every record. She had enough to know the balance no longer made sense. How much is left, she asked. Dean folded the check once, then again. There were investments. What kind? A property deal with Mark Ellery. Carol had never heard the name. Dean spoke faster. It was supposed to turn around in 18 months. Then the market shifted and the financing collapsed. How much is left? He looked at the ground. 9,400, maybe a little less after closing costs. For a moment, all Carol heard was dry grass moving against the bus tires. She had expected a bad number. The actual number still felt like a physical blow. You lost almost all of it. I was trying to rebuild it before you found out. For how long? Dean swallowed. Years. How many? He did not answer. Carol did the math from the records herself. Nearly 10. Dean's shoulders dropped. I thought I could fix it. And then May died. He looked up quickly. Carol saw the answer before he spoke. You knew about the land. I saw the county notice. You opened my mail. I was trying to understand what assets we had. No. You were trying to understand what I had. Dean shook his head. Carol, you started questioning everything. The account, the deed, the bills. I did not know what you were going to do. There it was. Not concern. Fear. Not fear that Carol was losing her mind. Fear that she was using it. Carol kept her voice level. You needed me declared incapable before I could revoke your power of attorney, hire my own lawyer, or demand a full accounting. Dean's mouth opened. No sentence came out. You did not need Dr. Fulton to believe I was confused, Carol said. You needed enough people to act like it might be true. The check hung uselessly in his hand. Dean looked older than he had an hour earlier. For the first time, his calm expression did not rearrange itself fast enough. I did not know what else to do, he said. Carol studied him. She believed he meant it. That was not the same as forgiving it. Then learn something else, she said. She turned toward the bus. Carol. She stopped but did not look back. What do you want from me? An accounting of every dollar you moved under that power of attorney, and your cooperation ending it. Dean gave a tired laugh. You make it sound like a business. No, Carol said. I am finally refusing to let you make my life sound like your property. She went inside and closed the folding bus door. Dean remained on the gravel for several minutes before driving away. Hannah arrived near dusk carrying 2 takeout containers and an apology. I should have come that morning. Carol moved a stack of papers so her daughter could sit. You did not know what was happening. I knew enough to know it was strange. You also had a job. That sounds like you protecting me from feeling guilty. Carol looked at her daughter. Maybe a little. Hannah smiled sadly. Can we just agree I wish I had come? Yes. They ate fried chicken sandwiches on paper napkins while Carol told her the parts of the bus story she had not explained by phone. Hannah kept asking practical questions. Could the bus be made roadworthy? Was the land insured? Did Carol have heat? Had Tessa found a safer place for her to sleep if the weather turned? The questions felt like care because they left room for Carol's answers. Halfway through dinner, Hannah's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and turned it face down. A minute later it buzzed again. Scott, Carol asked. Hannah nodded. She answered on the third call. Hey, I'm still with Mom. Carol could not hear Scott's words. She could hear what they did to Hannah's voice. No, I know I said 6. A pause. I am not choosing her over you. Another pause. I just need tonight. Hannah's shoulders had drawn inward. Carol watched her daughter begin explaining the guardianship case to a man who already knew about it. She explained why Carol should not be alone. She explained why dinner had taken longer. She explained why leaving immediately would make her feel terrible. Then she apologized. I am sorry, I know you had plans for us. Carol felt something cold move through her. Not because Scott sounded like Dean. She could not hear Scott at all. Because Hannah sounded like Carol. After the call ended, Hannah set the phone down carefully. The screen lit again almost at once. She did not touch it. I just apologized for sitting with my mother during a crisis, she said. Carol waited. Hannah stared at the worn bus floor. He does this all the time, but never enough that I could point to one thing and call it bad. What does he do? He checks in when I go somewhere without him. If I do not answer, he says he was worried. If I make plans, he asks why we are not doing something together. Her eyes filled. When I tell him I need time with friends, he gets quiet until I am the one comforting him. Carol said nothing. Hannah looked up. I thought that was what being wanted felt like. Carol reached across the aisle and took her hand. No. The phone buzzed again. Hannah flinched but did not pick it up. I do not want to be 66 before I learn the difference. Carol squeezed her fingers. You do not have to decide everything tonight. Hannah nodded. Then she turned the phone completely off. That small action seemed to change the air inside the bus. They finished eating in silence. For once, neither woman apologized for taking the time. 4 days later, Carol sat in a small clinic exam room with Tessa beside her. The independent physician, Dr. Lena Park, had never treated Dean and had no connection to Cedar Light Fellowship. That mattered to Tessa. It mattered even more to Carol. Dr. Park began with ordinary questions about date, place, memory, attention, and problem solving. Carol answered them without difficulty. Then Dr. Park asked what kind of bookkeeping Carol had done. Carol relaxed for the first time since entering the clinic. Church accounts. 3 services on Sundays. Payroll, building fund, benevolence fund, mission account, and a discretionary fund the elders always remembered existed right after I closed the month. Dr. Park smiled. That sounds complicated. Not if people tell you the truth about where the money went. The words left Carol before she could stop them. Tessa looked down to hide a smile. Dr. Park asked Carol to explain how she would trace a deposit that was short by several $100s. Carol walked through the steps from count sheet to deposit receipt to bank record. She did not perform for the doctor. She simply did what she had done for most of her adult life. The evaluation took less than half an hour. Dr. Park printed a summary stating that Carol demonstrated intact memory, reasoning, judgment, and decision-making capacity. There was no clinical basis for the claim that she could not manage her own affairs. Carol read the page twice. She expected triumph. What she felt instead was exhaustion. A stranger had needed less than 30 minutes to verify what the people closest to her had made her defend for weeks. Tessa touched her elbow in the hallway. This paper is not your worth. I know, but it is useful evidence. Carol folded it into third. I know that too. She slipped it into the same coat pocket where the emergency envelope had once rested. Nina Patel's office was above a pharmacy on Main Street in Havenrock. The stairs creaked, and the waiting room smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Nina reviewed the physician's letter, the power of attorney, the court filing, and the financial records Carol had been able to gather. "We can revoke the power of attorney now," Nina said. "Then we notify the institutions that may have relied on it." Carol signed the revocation. Her hand did not shake. Nina looked at the guardianship filing next. "With this evaluation and your direct objection, Dean's claim becomes much harder to support." "How hard?" "Hard enough that his lawyers should think carefully before pushing it." Carol nodded. "And the retirement account?" Nina's expression changed. "That is separate but serious." She explained that they could demand a full accounting of transactions and pursue a civil claim for money Dean had handled improperly. She also explained that conduct involving an older adult's finances could raise other consequences depending on what the records showed. Carol listened until Nina finished. "Do I have to make this criminal?" "No, my job is to tell you the options, not choose your goal." Carol looked at the ledger photos in her folder. Beatrice had spent years helping people leave without replacing one controller with another. Carol wanted the same rule applied to herself. "I want the guardianship stopped," she said. "I want my financial authority back. And I want an honest accounting of what he took or lost." Nina waited. "That is all. For now, then that is what we pursue." The guardianship petition began to unravel quickly after that. Dean's attorney received the independent capacity report and the formal revocation of the power of attorney. Dr. Fulton, faced with a request to document exactly what evaluation he had performed, declined to support any claim of incapacity. Pastor Allen provided no evidence beyond what Dean had told him. Within days, Dean withdrew the petition rather than carry it into a contested hearing. Carol did not celebrate when Nina called with the news. She sat on the bus steps and watched a hawk circle over the field. The threat had ended. The fact that it had existed did not disappear with it. The financial case took longer. Bank statements led to investment records. Investment records led to a failed real estate partnership. The numbers confirmed what Dean had admitted on the gravel drive. He had moved retirement funds under authority Carol had trusted him to use for ordinary financial management. He had hidden the losses for years. He had also acquired an interest in a small rental property Carol had never known about. Nina sent a demand for accounting and repayment. Dean's lawyer called within a week to discuss settlement. Carol expected anger from Dean. Instead, she received silence. The silence no longer frightened her. It had become information rather than punishment. The final settlement did not restore every dollar. There was not enough left for that. It did require Dean to transfer his interest in the rental property, surrender a share of remaining business assets, and make scheduled payments over time. Most important to Carol, the agreement included a complete financial accounting. No more missing columns. No more "you do not need to worry about that." The signing took place in Nina's conference room on a gray November afternoon. Carol sat with Nina on one side of the table. Dean and his attorney sat on the other. The stack of papers between them looked almost absurdly ordinary. Dean signed page after page without meeting Carol's eyes. The final signature line, his pen paused. Then he wrote his name. Nina gathered the documents. "It is done." Dean remained seated. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a small photograph. The edges were soft from years of handling. He placed it on the table instead of handing it directly to Carol. A woman in her 40s stood beside a bright yellow bus. Moot 9 was painted cleanly along the side. She wore a plain skirt, a cardigan, and a smile that looked nothing like the hard woman Dean had described. Carol knew her immediately. "Beatrice." Dean nodded. "I was 15 when that was taken." His voice was quiet. "I kept it after she died." Carol looked from the photograph to him. "Did you know about the bus?" "Not then." "And later?" Dean rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. "I knew there were things my father did not tell the truth about." Carol waited. Dean's face tightened. "I never went looking." That answer hurt in a way the larger admissions had not. Not because it was surprising. Because it was so ordinary. He had inherited a story that protected him from asking harder questions, and he had chosen the comfort of keeping it. "I think you should have this," he said. Carol did not thank him. She picked up the photograph and slid it into her folder beside the ledger copies. It did not feel like a gift. It felt like a piece of evidence finally returned to the correct file. Outside the building, Pastor Allen waited beside his truck. He removed his cap when he saw Carol. "I called the old members I could find," he said. "I found meeting notes from 1979 too." Carol stopped several feet away. Pastor Allen looked embarrassed. "We failed Beatrice." Carol said nothing. "And I failed you." He took a breath. I sat in your living room and let Dean describe your mind as if you were not sitting 10 feet away. Yes, I should have asked you one question before I agreed to anything. Yes, he nodded, accepting the answer without asking her to soften it. The adult Bible class Beatrice taught is still part of the church schedule, he said. It has never really found a home again. Carol almost smiled at the oddness of the offer she sensed coming. I would like you to teach it if you ever wanted to. Pastor Allen raised one hand quickly. Not as repayment. I know it does not repay anything. Good. I just thought the choice should be yours. That made Carol look at him again. I will think about it. He nodded. For the first time, no one translated Carol's need to think into evidence that she could not decide. She drove back to the land with Beatrice's photograph on the passenger seat. The afternoon sun flashed across the glass whenever the road curved. Justice, Carol realized, did not feel like a door slamming on someone else. It felt like finding her own name at the top of documents she had chosen to sign. It felt like money traced honestly, even when the total could not be restored. It felt like an apology that did not demand forgiveness as proof it had been sincere. And it felt like a photograph no longer hidden in a drawer. Winter came early. Carol did not sleep on the bus once the hard freezes started. Tessa helped her find a small furnished apartment in town while the civil case was being resolved. Carol kept returning to Maysland anyway. The bus became a project. Local volunteers helped assess what could be repaired and what had to be replaced. 2 people from church helped remove ruined flooring without being asked to lead anything. Hannah spent weekends sanding rust from the interior panels. No one tried to make the bus new. Carol wanted its age visible. She wanted people to understand that usefulness and damage could exist in the same object. The small brass key from the box never found a lock Carol could identify. She did not force an answer onto it just because mysteries were uncomfortable. The notebook and letters had already told her what mattered. By February, Hannah had made a decision of her own. She did not announce it with a speech. One Tuesday evening, she drove to Scott's apartment, placed his spare key on the kitchen counter, and told him the relationship was over. When he began asking for explanations she had already given for months, she left. She did not stay to make her decision comfortable for him. Later that night, she called Carol from her car. I kept waiting to feel cruel, Hannah said. Do you? No. What do you feel? Hannah thought for a moment. Quiet. Carol understood exactly what she meant. By spring, Route 9 no longer looked abandoned. The rust had been treated, the broken windows replaced, and the interior rebuilt with a small desk, secure file cabinet, 2 private meeting areas, and a ramp at the side door. The exterior stayed yellow and white. Carol had the old route number repainted in the same position where she had first seen its faded shadow. Underneath it, she added a new line in smaller letters. Room to choose your next step. The bus sat permanently on May's 4 acres beside gravel turnaround and a rebuilt section of the old shed. A hand-painted roadside sign identified the place as the Route 9 Elder Independence Project. The Hawthorne County Council on Aging staffed intake there twice a week. Nina's legal aid program sent a volunteer attorney on Thursday. Other days were reserved for financial literacy appointments, document organization, and referrals for older adults dealing with coercion, exploitation, or housing pressure. Carol refused every suggestion that the project should be named after her. She also refused to turn Beatrice into a saint. Put her name in the history, Carol told the committee. Not above the door. The dedication drew about 30 people on a mild Saturday in April. Tessa stood near the front with Nina and Dr. Park. Pastor Allen stayed toward the back. Hannah arranged coffee on folding tables and did not check her phone every 3 minutes. Rose Danner came from Indiana with her oldest son driving. She moved slowly, but when Tessa invited her to speak, she took the microphone without hesitation. In 1976, I rode this bus out of a county I thought I would die in, Rose said. The crowd went still. My 2 boys were with me. Beatrice Mercer got us to a car that took us somewhere safe. Rose looked toward the restored bus. I never thanked her where anyone could hear me. Her voice caught. I spent decades protecting the secret because the secret had protected us. She paused until she could continue. Today I can finally say the useful part out loud. Beatrice did not save me by deciding my life for me. She gave me a way to carry out a decision I had already made. No one applauded immediately. The silence felt respectful rather than uncertain. Then Rose's son reached for her hand. A few people began clapping, and the sound spread gently through the small crowd. Carol remained beside the bus door. She wanted the moment to belong to Rose. Someone mentioned that Dean had moved to another state to stay near his sister. Carol heard it and felt almost nothing sharp. There were still forms to sign and one remaining asset to divide. The ending was not clean. It no longer needed to be. Dean could still complicate paperwork. He could no longer define the ground under Carol's feet. Late that afternoon, after most of the visitors had gone, Carol found Hannah inside Route 9. Her daughter sat on the same rear bench where they had eaten dinner months earlier. A plain spiral notebook rested on her knee. Carol stopped in the doorway. Hannah uncapped a pen and looked at the blank page for a long moment. Then she wrote her name and the date. Underneath, she added one sentence. I get to decide what care feels like in my life. She closed the notebook and looked up. Carol did not ask what Hannah planned to write next. That was the point. She only smiled. Sunlight moved through the repaired windows and laid a bright rectangle across the floor where Carol had first found the hidden box. For nearly 50 years, Route 9 had carried one idea forward without anyone planning it that way. Help was not the same thing as authority. Concern was not the same thing as consent. And love did not become more loving because it spoke softly while taking choices away. Carol had spent years believing control had to be obvious before she was allowed to object to it. Dean rarely shouted. He arranged, suggested, worried, interpreted, and involved other respectable people until resistance looked unreasonable. That was what made the pattern difficult to name. The harm did not arrive wearing the face people expected. Beatrice's story complicated the lesson further. Dean had learned something damaging from his father and from a community that accepted rumor more easily than uncertainty. That history explained part of him. It did not excuse what he chose to repeat. Adults can inherit fear, silence, entitlement, and distorted ideas of care without choosing their origin. They still become responsible for what they do with the inheritance. The same was true in the other direction. Hannah did not need to copy Carol's decades of accommodation simply because she had watched them. Seeing a pattern early gave her the chance to interrupt it early. Carol's legal papers mattered because power often becomes concrete through documents, accounts, signatures, and institutional assumptions. But the deeper recovery happened before any court filing disappeared. It began when Carol stopped treating her own certainty as something that required Dean's approval. That distinction matters in families because genuine care always contains room for the other person's judgment. Support can include advice, warnings, rides, professional help, and even disagreement. Once support depends on obedience, it has crossed into something else. The most useful question is often not whether someone says they are helping. It is whether the person receiving that help is still allowed to choose, refuse, reconsider, and leave. Route 9 had once moved women across county lines. Decades later, it helped Carol cross a different boundary. She stopped waiting for permission to trust the part of herself that noticed when things did not add up. That was the freedom she kept, long after the paperwork was signed and the bus was restored.